What's up, everybody? As you can see, I'm back stateside. I was going to say safe and sound, but that would be biblically incorrect. What do I mean? The safest place in a believer's life is in the center of God's will for their life, even if that place is subject to incoming ballistic missiles. And I just want to say that over the 12-day war, and that's currently the name, at least that Donald Trump has stuck to that war, whether it stays or not, whether it endures or not, is the name for the war. No one knows. But during that 12 days, I felt nothing but peace the entire time. Never felt that I was in any danger whatsoever. And it wasn't the most dangerous time I had ever lived in Israel. Believe it or not, the most dangerous time I ever lived in Israel. And in fact, nothing even comes close to the level of danger of that episode I'm talking about, that being the second intifada that reigned between the years 2000 and 2004, in which I experienced terrorism almost on a daily basis while living in Jerusalem, and what I often refer to as the triangle of death, that area between the Shuk Machane Yehuda, Ben Yehuda Street, which is what I lived on, and Jaffa Street. In those days, I lived on Ben Yehuda Street, which was the main pedestrian road of Jerusalem of those days. And back in 1997, I believe it was September 1997, so this is before the Second Intifada. Okay, Second Intifada began in the year 2000. Already back in 1997, when I had just gotten out of the Israeli army, moved into a new place, an apartment on Ben Yehuda Street, 3 suicide bombers blew themselves up right in front of my apartment complex. They had formed themselves in a triangle, okay, in which one guy at the, whatever you call it, geometrically, help me out for those of you that are into geometry, the top of the triangle was supposed to blow up first, causing all the survivors who weren't killed in that initial blast to run to his 2 buddies, who would blow up a little later, catching the survivors. It was an amazing day with many stories, it's a story within itself, okay? There was a waitress who was working at a cafe at the bottom of my building. In those days, there was a cafe, very famous cafe in Jerusalem known as the Atara Cafe. And one of the waitresses noticed that the terrorists, all 3 of them, by the way, were dressed in drag. These were male terrorists dressed as men. And one of them forgot to shave that morning, so he had a 5 o'clock shadow. And the waitress recognized that and called him out, causing him to panic. At the same time, across the street, there was a toy store. I think it was called, in those days, it doesn't exist anymore, I think it was called the Jerusalem Bazaar. And a child also noticed something strange about the terrorist, tried to call him out, and the terrorist grabbed that child and hugged that child. The 2 terrorists that were outed by these respective civilians, the one being a waitress, the other being a child, those 2 terrorists prematurely blew themselves up. One of the only fatalities other than the 3 terrorists who blew themselves to smithereens, and by the way, one of whose body parts ended up all over my roof of my building. The only other casualty, if I recall correctly, besides the 3 terrorists, was the child. Unfortunately, the child that saw that this was, something suspicious, and the terrorist grabbed the child and again took the child with him into the afterlife, basically, when he blew himself up. That happened to me in 1997, and I saw the aftermath of this terror attack with all of its gore. I won't go into it because I don't want this video to be marked as for adults only or to have restrictions placed on it. But that was a typical day in the life of Jerusalem 3 years later, during what was known as the Second Intifada, which visited upon Jerusalem every single day, basically bus bombings, cafe bombings, and that was by far the most dangerous time in my life in Israel and probably the darkest days in Jerusalem's modern history. And yet, during that same period, peace reigned in my heart. In other words, I didn't go through my life each day in fear and in panic. Why? Because the safest place in a believer's life is in the center of God's will for that life. Again, even if that place is subject to incoming ballistic missiles or subject to daily bus bombings and cafe bombings. I remember during the time of that Second Intifada, I was invited to be a guest speaker while on a visit home to a rural church in Ohio, a church in rural Ohio. And I remember at the end of my message, always field questions. My favorite time is actually interacting with people in the in the question and answer period. And I remember this farmer stood up and said to me, "Steve, aren't you afraid to live in that place while, with bus bombings, cafe bombings?" And I said to him, "Sir, I'm safer in that environment in the center of God's will than you are in your tractor here in rural Ohio if you're not in the center of God's will for your life." So, Steve, this sounds preachy. Yes, it is. I rarely get preachy with you, but I just did, and I felt it was the right place to do so. 12 of the most special days, one of the highlights of my entire life. I did not want to go to Israel back on June 2nd. And there was no particular reason why that I can think of. I had been away for the country for 2 years, the longest I had ever been away from Israel. Usually I'm only away from the country for 4 months over the summer when there's no tourism. We never really work as guides during, June, July, August. Tourism starts to return usually in October, and I was scheduled to return to Israel on October 8th, 2023, the day after the famous October 7 terror attacks. And of course, I never returned because all my tours canceled, and they've canceled ever since. So I was away from the country for 2 years. Now, of course, I used to live in Israel, so some of you are probably wondering, what was I doing away? I had to move back here to the U.S. Back in 2021, if I'm correct, when my father took a major downward spiral in his health. My mother, who's elderly, couldn't deal with it all on her own, and I was unemployed because of the coronavirus. I've been unemployed basically for 4 out of 5 years because of things totally not in my control. That's another lesson I've learned over the last few years is we have very little control over our lives. I am a control freak, guys. Just like many of you are. We want to believe that we have control over our lives. But the last few years, I would say I've been taught over and over again that I have zero control over the macro grand sweeps of my life. I can control my attitude on how I deal with it each day, and you can too, but I'm not really sovereign over the particulars or the circumstances that play out in my life, and perhaps you've learned that in your life too. But I was here to help my mom and would commute back to Israel to work, still guide tours. I'm still available as a tour guide. And I was scheduled to go back on that October 8th following the Hamas attacks and never did. So for 2 years, I was here at home and out of place, out of mind. It's strange. I followed, as you know, the October 7 let's say the post-October 7 world or post-October 7 Israel closely, reporting on it, watching the news from Israel every day, plugged into Israeli sources, plugged into Israeli media, giving you what I hope are good insights into what's been going on the last couple years, because I do have access to the Hebrew media while I'm here, as much as I would, of course, if I were in Israel itself, but I still wasn't living in the country. And therefore, to an extent, it was out of sight, out of mind. But also, I was afraid that the Israel to which I would return would be an Israel that was very, very depressed because of the October 7 war. And I was afraid, not afraid, but I just didn't want to be in the midst of all the depression. And I thought there would be a defeatist attitude. But man, was I wrong, guys, because when I showed up in Israel on June 3rd, I saw nothing of the sort. I saw an Israel that was exactly the Israel of pre-October 7. The country has always had this phenomenal vibe to it, this great energy to it, largely because the population is mostly under the age of 30. You know, Israel probably has one of the youngest populations in the Western world. I think it may be the only country in the Western world with a reproducing rate that keeps the population afloat. In other words, it's not a shrinking population like the rest of the Western world because of low birth rates, but Israel has an above average birth rate. And again, this is why so much of the country is under the age of 30. It just got this phenomenal vibe. As soon as I got off the airplane, I felt the vibe. And by the way, on the airplane itself, I was so encouraged. Usually these El Al flights are overwhelmingly, 1/3 to 1/2 the people I'm with on these El Al flights from New York are usually these Hasidic Jews, the ultra-Orthodox Jews with the black hats and the black suits. I didn't see a single one of them on the plane. Why? Because 1/3 to 1/2 of the plane was this huge Christian group from a Bible college in Kentucky. And I was shocked when I encountered them at Newark Airport. When I saw, it was so obvious that they were Christian kids. They were wearing crosses and they had T-shirts with Christian slogans. And I went up to them at Newark Airport and said, "What are you doing here? Are you going to Israel? There's so few tour groups at the moment." And they were so filled with eagerness to go, and it was just amazing. So even at Newark Airport, while I was waiting to get on my flight to Israel, I was so encouraged because of this massive Christian tour that was going to share the plane with me. And I realized, my gosh, maybe we really are at the end of this whole October 7, slump in every way, in tourism. Maybe tourism really is going to come back. And for those of you who are scheduled for tours, and some of you are scheduled to go on tour with me as early as this coming January, others of you for the Huckabee tour, yes, there is a Huckabee tour scheduled, even though he is the ambassador to Israel. He's still leading a tour there in February. That tour is still scheduled to come. So if you're scheduled to come on tour, folks, in the near future, January, February, March, April, I still have my bookings, thank God. Only one tour canceled on me so far for this April. Don't cancel your tour. The war is near its end, but it's already feeling like post-war Israel. The story, of course, of the 12-day war made this trip particularly special. But folks, the 10 or 11 days that I was there preceding the war was so special. I went there to, particularly, the whole reason why I went there is because I owed the Ministry of Tourism 6 continuing education days. I just want to make sure this mic is on. 1 second. Yes, it is. Sometimes this mic is the kind of mic that you tap it, it goes off. You tap it, it goes on. And I've inadvertently tapped it in the past, and the mic is conked out halfway through a video. So I just want to make sure that didn't happen. By the way, thank you, Athey. Thank you, Pastor Brett, for setting me up with this wonderful microphone many months ago while I was in Israel doing these war updates with my iPhone 11 Pro Max. As much as I love that phone, it doesn't compare to this professional mic in terms of audio quality. Or this camera that also was provided to me by Athey. So I want to thank my friends at Athey for setting me up with this professional quality studio. The only thing it lacks, of course, is a better background, and there's nothing I can do about that in this present stage of my life. It's going to be this background or bust, for at least a while. But in terms of the microphone and the video footage, it is better than that iPhone 11 Pro Max that I was using to do those war updates. And yet, I want to thank all of you that stayed tuned during those war updates. But as I said, part of the story of this trip to Israel is what I experienced before the war, which was I owed the Ministry of Tourism 6 Hishtalmiyot. Hishtalmiyot in Hebrew basically is referring to extended education days or field trips or seminars, okay? They require of us tour guides to do 2 of these every year towards a renewal of our tour guide license. I've missed the last 2 to 3 years, so I owed them about 6. So many months ago, I scheduled 6 such days, and that's why I went to Israel. I think another reason why I was not looking forward to this trip was that El Al has profiteered off of this war. It's outrageous. A flight to Israel, 2-way ticket, normally will cost me between $1,200 or $1,400. That's for a 2-way ticket. This time around, it was almost that much money for each way. I paid over $2,200 for a 2-way ticket, and yes, I was ticked off. I resented it. Having to dig into my savings. I'm living off my savings as an unemployed tour guide, and here I had to pay allow $2,200 of my savings, and I'm annoyed by it. It is what it is. I'll let it go because it's already a few weeks ago, but they've profiteered off of there being the only air carrier, the only airline flying to and from Israel for many months of this war, especially the last several months. So that was another reason. So that I didn't want to go. But I went, and as soon as I got off the plane, I was just moved beyond my wildest imagination. The moment the plane lands, by the way, now every flight that ends on El Al, the pilot gets on there, or the chief steward or stewardess gets on there and says, "We want to thank our armed forces, the IDF, for protecting us and fighting for the homeland." Man, I was moved to tears to hear that. Then I get off the plane, and I go down this ramp, Ben Gurion Airport, you walk down this ramp to the passport control, and along the way, I've seen this in the media, but to experience it personally is so much more powerful. The pictures of the hostages, line the entire path between the plane and the passport control, and boy, was that moving to experience that. And then getting my first Aroma coffee at Aroma, boy, it was just high after high after high, and none of this was I expecting. So it totally caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting to feel this emotional impact, and anyway, I saw phenomenal things during these 6 Hishtalmiyot. I was absolutely floored by what's been excavated in the last couple years that I haven't been there, particularly in what's called David City. The Pool Siloam, when I left a couple years ago, had only been partial. We're talking about the Pool Siloam from the Second Temple period, or Jesus's period, had only been partially excavated. Now the whole thing has been excavated, and not just the whole thing, but layers beneath it, going all the way back to the First Temple period and maybe even to Canaanite times. This was amazing. Now, what's funny is, of these 6 Hishtalmiyot that I had to do, this one on David City was in Russian. Steve, do you know Russian? No, I don't know any Russian other than "Nyet" and "Spasiba." Thank you. I took it in Russian because I wanted to get the credit for it. I needed, in the time that I was there, to get these 6 Hishtalmiyot behind me so I could renew my license. So I even signed up for the one in Russian. Usually they're given in Hebrew. A couple of them are given in English or Russian. So I took this one in Russian, and though I didn't understand a single thing that the teacher said during this 6 or 7 hour field trip, what I saw absolutely floored me. The amount of excavating that's been done since I was there a couple years ago. And it was enough just to see this stuff because I knew when I came home, I could look it all up in English and read up about it in English or Hebrew. I just needed to see what was out there. Oh, then I saw something called the Way of the Pilgrims, the road that leads from the Pool of Siloam at Jesus' day to the second temple itself. It was just absolutely amazing. And there in the midst of that street was a coin that had an inscription related to Pontius Pilate, still left there on the street. I mean, incredible stuff. Maybe the next episode, I'll share a little bit more in depth about what's been undug or what's been dug up over the last couple years, including that Pontius Pilate coin, the Pool of Siloam, all that stuff. I didn't want to go into too much depth in this video because it's the 4th of July weekend, and I know that many of you won't even see this video. I've learned the hard way the last couple years not to upload videos or to avoid, to the best of my ability, uploading videos on holiday weekends because you guys have more and more interesting things to do, more fish to fry than hang out with Steve the tour guide. So to wrap it up, folks, it was an incredible month. Both the 2 weeks preceding the war, as well as the 12 days that followed the 12 days of the war itself, a war that, in my opinion, has earned its place next to the 6-day war. I shared this in my updates during the war. What Israel accomplished during this war is nothing short of amazing, astounding. What it accomplished just in the first couple seconds, the first couple minutes of the war, astounding, unparalleled in history. The way it took out 30 of Iran's top military brass generals within seconds. The country's top 9 nuclear scientists responsible for the nuclear program and its weaponization gone in just the first couple seconds. Folks, this war will go down in history aside or alongside the 6-day war. It deserves it, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want America to get involved, because I felt that it would take away from the story of Israel's miraculous achievement. And as you know, as a believer, I believe that Israel's miraculous achievement, just by saying the word miraculous, infers God's working there behind the scenes, enabling the brilliance of Israel. And this goes back to the pager attack in September of 2024. The pager attack, folks, was the beginning of this war with Iran. It set the stage. Without that pager attack and Israel's amazing takeout of Nasrallah and Hezbollah, the war with Iran could not have happened. That, my friends, was the opening salvo of the 12-day war. Its origins are in the pager attack in September 2024, a brilliant attack in its own right, which should go down as one of the greatest intelligence operations in the history of modern-day intelligences or intelligence services of any country. Israel's Mossad, bar none, folks, is in a league by itself. More than the CIA, more than any of these. Why? Because they think out of the box and they do things that the CIA wouldn't even allow itself to do. I made a video about that during the war, and I think it was entitled, "Could America Have Achieved the Successes that Israel Has in This War? No, Here's Why." That's the name of that video. During those 12 days, I witnessed the incredible valor of the citizens of Israel, the people that I shared the bomb shelter with 25 times over those 12 days, the mothers with their infants, the neighbors, the families, people who would invite me the next day for lunch on the Shabbat. Just the way the citizenry came together, the valor of everyday people, folks, it was special. And I wouldn't have traded my place to be anywhere else on the planet during these 12 days. I had a front seat to history, and I'm so grateful for it. Well, folks, I've gone on and on and on. I thought this video would only be 10 minutes long. Last thing I'll say is, thank God, good news. I got my Ko-fi page back up and running. I thought it had been suspended or taken down for hate speech. I thought that somebody may have accused me of hate speech. That ended up not being the case. It turns out that Kofi suspected that the page was somehow an illegitimate page because I had not linked that page with YouTube. I've linked my YouTube channel. In other words, I provide you guys the link to Ko-fi, but I never informed Ko-fi officially, and that's what you have to do with them. They basically insist on having access to my YouTube channel. So as soon as they told me this yesterday, all I had to do was make a few clicks and officially link the channel to the Ko-fi page so that now they have access to my YouTube page as well. Two-way access now, and the page is up and running again. So that's good news. And hopefully I didn't lose any of you during the week it was suspended. It was over a week. It was about 8 days. Folks, this is Steve the Tour Guide wishing you a phenomenal 4th of July. For those of you who are in the United States, I understand that my friends in Canada celebrated Canada Day on the 1st of July. For those of you that live elsewhere, whether that be Europe or Africa or Australia or New Zealand, it turns out that I have viewers in all these places. I wish you well wherever you are. Have a phenomenal weekend, and thanks for spending this time with Steve the Tour Guide. This is Steve the Tour Guide signing off. Bye-bye.